Some say there's a thin veil between this world and what lies beyond. For most, it remains forever drawn. But what happens when a child slips through, if only for moments, and returns with a glimpse of something greater? What would you do if you were given a second chance, not just at life, but at understanding its purpose? This is the story of a girl who drowned on an ordinary summer day, and the extraordinary journey that brought her back changed forever. Stay with me. Emma Calloway was 8 years old when she died for 4 minutes and 37 seconds. It happened on a Thursday afternoon in July, the kind of summer day that feels endless until suddenly it isn't. The community pool was crowded with children, seeking refuge from the heat, their laughter echoing across chlorine-scented air as parents chatted in clusters beneath faded umbrellas. Emma's mother, Sarah, had looked away for only a moment, just long enough to answer a text from work. Just long enough for Emma, with her copper hair and constellation of freckles, to slip beneath the surface without a splash or cry. By the time they pulled her small body from the water, Emma's lips had turned the color of winter twilight. Sarah's screams cut through the sudden silence as lifeguards performed CPR, their movements mechanical yet desperate. Time stretched like taffy, each second an eternity as water spilled from Emma's lungs, but no breath returned to fill them. 4 minutes and 37 seconds. That's how long Emma was clinically dead, before she gasped suddenly, her small chest heaving as if pulled by invisible strings. Her eyes flew open, eyes that had always been hazel but now seemed, just for a moment, to reflect something luminous and strange. "The angel," she whispered, her voice raspy from trauma. "I met an angel. The doctors called it a miracle. They spoke of oxygen deprivation and the resilience of young bodies. They explained away her words as confusion, a dream born from a brain starved of air. But Emma knew differently. In the quiet of her hospital room, surrounded by beeping machines and the scent of antiseptic, she held tight to what she had seen. What no one understood yet was that Emma hadn't just returned from death. She had returned with something else, something that would change not only her life, but the lives of everyone around her. Because what Emma had glimpsed in those 4 minutes and 37 seconds wasn't just an angel, it was a purpose. The hospital discharged Emma 3 days later with instructions for follow-up appointments and a pamphlet on post-traumatic stress in children. Sarah watched her daughter with the vigilance of someone who had glimpsed how quickly everything could end, checking her breathing while she slept, hovering near the bathtub, startling at the smallest splash. But Emma wasn't afraid. Something had shifted inside her, like puzzle pieces rearranging to reveal a different picture. "Mom," she said one evening as Sarah tucked her into bed, "I need to tell you what happened when I was in the water." Sarah perched on the edge of the mattress, her fingers absently tracing the outline of dolphins on Emma's comforter. She'd been dreading this conversation, unsure how to help her daughter process the trauma. "The angel wasn't scary," Emma began, her voice small but certain. "She looked like light wrapped in more light, and she showed me things, important things." Sarah nodded, prepared to validate what the doctors had called a hallucination. "She showed me my life, Mom. Not just what already happened, but what's going to happen." Emma's eyes grew distant, focused on something Sarah couldn't see. "She showed me how everything we do matters, even the tiny things, especially the tiny things." In the weeks that followed, Sarah noticed subtle changes in her daughter. Emma gave away her allowance to a homeless man outside the grocery store. She befriended Lily Parker, a girl at school others avoided because of her worn clothes and unwashed hair. She wrote thank you notes to her teachers, the school janitor, even the mail carrier. "Why Lily?" Sarah asked one afternoon as they drove home from school. Emma looked up from the friendship bracelet she was weaving. "Because she's going to be a doctor someday who saves lots of people, but only if someone believes in her now." Sarah glanced at her daughter in the rearview mirror, a chill running through her that had nothing to do with the car's air conditioning. How could you possibly know that? The angel showed me, Emma said simply, returning to her bracelet. By the time Emma turned 9, the changes had become impossible to dismiss. She insisted on volunteering at the local animal shelter. She started a kindness club at school. She seemed to know exactly who needed help and precisely what kind of help they needed. Mrs. Abernathy, their elderly neighbor who rarely left her house. Emma brought her soup the day before she came down with pneumonia. The new boy at school with no friends. Emma sat with him at lunch the same day his parents told him they were divorcing. The school bus driver who always seemed grumpy. Emma made him a card thanking him for keeping them safe 3 days before his mother passed away. It wasn't just kindness. It was kindness with an uncanny precision, as if Emma could see invisible wounds and future joys that no one else could perceive. Dr. Melissa Chen, the child psychologist Sarah eventually consulted, observed Emma through several sessions before offering her assessment. Near-death experiences, especially in children, can trigger profound personality changes, she explained in her office lined with degrees in children's artwork. The brain undergoes trauma, and sometimes this creates new neural pathways, new ways of perceiving the world. But she seems to know things, Sarah insisted, lowering her voice though Emma was in the waiting room. Things she couldn't possibly know. Dr. Chen's expression remained neutral, professional. Children are remarkably intuitive. Emma may be picking up on subtle cues that adults miss. Combined with her experience, it's given her a heightened sense of empathy. But Sarah wasn't convinced. Neither was Emma's father, David, who had remained skeptical about the angel story from the beginning. She needs to move on, he argued during one of their increasingly tense co-parenting conversations. All this talk about angels and missions, it's not healthy. The breaking point came on Emma's 10th birthday. Instead of presents, she had asked friends and family to bring items for care packages she planned to deliver to the children's hospital. The same hospital where they saved you? David asked, trying to make sense of his daughter's request. Emma shook her head. No, Dad. The one across town. There's a boy there named Michael who has leukemia. He's going to be really important someday, but he's sad right now because nobody visits him. David's face paled. Emma, how do you know about a sick boy named Michael? I told you. The angel showed me. That night, after the party, David searched online for information about pediatric leukemia patients at the hospital Emma had mentioned. He found nothing specific, of course. Such information would be private. But the seed of doubt had been planted. The following weekend, he drove Emma to the hospital with her carefully packed care packages. He expected to be turned away or to discover there was no Michael. Instead, a nurse at the pediatric oncology ward smiled when Emma asked for him by name. Are you a friend from school? The nurse asked, leading them down a corridor painted with jungle animals. No, Emma replied, but I'm supposed to be his friend now. In a room at the end of the hall, they found Michael, thin, pale, with a blue, knit cap covering his hairless head. His eyes lit up at the sight of visitors, especially one his own age. David stood frozen in the doorway as Emma introduced herself and presented a care package specifically for Michael, filled with model dinosaurs, comic books, and a handheld game console she'd saved months to buy. How did you know these are all my favorite things? Michael asked, his voice weak but his smile wide. Emma shrugged. Sometimes you just know what people need. As they left the hospital, David's worldview had shifted irrevocably. Emma, he said carefully as they walked to the car, I think it's time you tell me everything about this angel. And so, sitting in the hospital parking lot, Emma described what she had experienced in those 4 minutes and 37 seconds. The overwhelming peace, the being of light, and most importantly, the glimpses of what her life could mean if she chose to listen. She showed me that everything connects, Emma explained, her small hands animated as she tried to capture something beyond words. Like a giant web, Dad. One person helps another, and it spreads and spreads until it comes back around. She called it the ripple effect of kindness. David listened, really listened, for the first time since the accident. And as his daughter spoke, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of wonder, and with it, the unsettling possibility that there might be more to existence than what he could see and touch. What neither of them noticed was the woman watching them from a hospital window, a nurse who had overheard Emma's story, and who would, in time, become an essential part of their journey. Her name was Grace, and she had her own history with angels. By the time Emma turned 13, her reputation had spread beyond her small community. The local newspaper ran a feature about the kindness kid, who seemed to have an uncanny ability to be in the right place at the right time. A YouTube channel documented her volunteer efforts, from organizing disaster relief for a town hit by tornadoes to establishing a program pairing lonely seniors with school children as pen pals. What the articles didn't capture was the toll it was taking. Emma's grades were slipping. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. The visions, glimpses of people's futures, flashes of pain or joy not yet experienced, came more frequently now, sometimes leaving her dizzy and disoriented. "You can't help everyone," Sarah insisted one night, finding Emma at the kitchen table at 2 a.m., writing letters to strangers. "You're still a child yourself." Emma looked up, her eyes older than her years. "But I saw what happens if I don't try, Mom. The angel showed me both paths." It was Grace, the nurse from the hospital who had eventually become a family friend, who first noticed the nosebleeds. Small ones at first, easily dismissed, then longer, more frequent. "She needs a complete workup," Grace told Sarah after witnessing a particularly severe episode. "Brain scans, blood work, everything." The diagnosis came 3 days before Christmas, a small tumor pressing against Emma's frontal lobe. Likely benign, the doctor said, but requiring immediate surgery. "Is this why I've been seeing things?" Emma asked the neurologist, Dr. Patel, her voice small in the sterile exam room. Dr. Patel exchanged glances with Sarah. "It's possible the pressure is causing some unusual neurological symptoms," he said carefully. "Visual disturbances, personality changes. These can all be related to frontal lobe tumors, so there was never an angel," David said later that night, his voice a mixture of relief and disappointment. "Just a medical condition." Emma sat on the porch swing, watching snow begin to fall in the glow of Christmas lights. "That's not true," she said quietly. "The tumor might explain some things, but not everything. Not Michael, not Mrs. Abernathy, not the things I couldn't possibly know." The surgery was scheduled for January 10th. As the date approached, something unexpected happened. People began arriving at the Calloway home, dozens, then hundreds of them. Michael, now in remission, came with his parents. Lily Parker, on track to become valedictorian, brought homemade cookies. Mrs. Abernathy knitted a blanket. The bus driver organized a meal train. They all had stories about Emma, small kindnesses that had changed trajectories, gentle words that had come at exactly the right moment, intuitive gestures that had somehow mattered more than seemed possible. "I don't understand," David whispered to Grace as they watched the living room fill with visitors. "How did one child touch so many lives?" Grace's eyes held a knowing look. "Some people are bridges," she said simply. "They connect this world to something larger." The night before surgery, Emma couldn't sleep. She slipped out of bed and found her father sitting alone in the kitchen. "Dad," she said, "I need to tell you something important." David looked up, his face etched with worry he'd been trying to hide. "If something goes wrong tomorrow—" "Nothing's going to go wrong," he interrupted, the fear making his voice sharp. "Please listen," Emma insisted. "The angel showed me 2 possible paths for my life. In one, I live a long time and help a lot of people. In the other," she took a deep breath. "In the other, I only get a few years, but the ripples go even further. David felt his throat tighten. Emma, I'm not scared, she continued, but I need you to promise me something. If the second path is mine, you have to help people understand what I was trying to do. You have to keep the ripples going. David pulled his daughter into his arms, unable to speak past the knot in his throat. They stayed that way until dawn broke, father and daughter, holding on to each other as if they could stop time through sheer force of will. The surgery lasted 7 hours, longer than expected. Complications, the surgical nurse told the family gathered in the waiting room. Bleeding that wouldn't stop. When Dr. Patel finally emerged, his surgical mask hanging around his neck, his eyes told them everything before he spoke a word. We removed the tumor, he said, his voice heavy with the weight of what followed. But there was more damage than the scans showed. She's in recovery, but... He paused, choosing his words carefully. She hasn't regained consciousness, and given the location of the bleeding, we're not certain she will. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of beeping machines, whispered consultations, and prayers offered in every faith tradition represented by the community that had gathered at the hospital. Sarah refused to leave Emma's bedside. David paced the halls like a caged animal. Grace used her position to bend hospital rules, allowing Michael, Lily, and others brief visits despite the ICU restrictions. On the third day, as a winter storm raged outside, Emma's vital signs began to falter. We're losing her, a nurse called, out as monitors screamed electronic warnings. The medical team rushed in with crash carts and urgent commands. Sarah was ushered into the hallway, where she collapsed against David's chest. Grace stood nearby, her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. And then, something impossible happened. The lights in the hospital corridor flickered once, twice, and went out completely. For 3 seconds, the emergency generators failed to engage, plunging the hall into complete darkness. When the lights returned, Dr. Patel stood in the doorway of Emma's room, his face ashen. She's asking for all of you, he said, his professional composure cracking. She's awake and talking. I can't explain it. They rushed into the room to find Emma sitting up in bed, her eyes clear and bright in a way they hadn't been for months. I saw her again, were her first words. The angel. Dr. Patel shook his head, checking monitors and pupils. Emma, you experienced severe trauma. What you're describing is likely a hallucination caused by oxygen deprivation or medication. Emma finished for him, smiling gently. That's what you were going to say 5 years ago at the pool, too. Dr. Patel froze. How could you possibly know that? Because she showed me this moment, Emma said. Both times. And now I understand why. She reached for her parents' hands, one in each of her own. The angel isn't just for me. She's for everyone who needs to remember that we're all connected. That what we do matters. Grace stepped forward then, her professional reserve finally breaking. I believe you, she whispered, because I saw her too once, when I was 9 years old, trapped in a car accident that killed my parents. The room fell silent as Grace continued. She told me I would help a child someday, who had also seen beyond the veil. I've been waiting my whole life to meet you, Emma. In that moment, something shifted in the room. Something beyond medical explanation or rational understanding. It was as if, just for a heartbeat, the veil between worlds thinned enough for everyone present to sense what Emma and Grace had experienced. Dr. Patel would later document Emma's recovery as spontaneous neurological reorganization following trauma. The medical journal article would note the unusual circumstances but offer no definitive explanation for how a child with such extensive brain damage could not only recover, but show no lasting impairment. What the article wouldn't mention was how Dr. Patel began ending his patient visits by asking about their hopes and fears, not just their symptoms, or how he started a foundation funding research into near-death experiences, or how years later, He would tell his own daughter about a patient who had changed the course of his life by showing him that medicine had limits, but compassion did not. Because that was Emma's true gift, not the visions or the seeming miracles, but the reminder that in a world of science and skepticism, there was still room for mystery, for wonder, for faith in something beyond what could be measured or proven. And that was just the beginning of the ripples. 10 years passed. Emma Calloway graduated from college with a degree in psychology and a minor in religious studies. Her undergraduate thesis on transcendent experiences and their impact on prosocial behavior won national recognition, though academic reviewers noted her unusual methodology, combining rigorous data analysis with deeply personal narratives from hundreds of individuals who claimed to have glimpsed something beyond ordinary reality. The tumor never returned. The visions, however, continued, though Emma had learned to integrate them into her life without being overwhelmed. They came less as specific predictions now, and more as gentle nudges, intuitive pulls toward certain people or places where she was needed. On a crisp autumn morning, Emma stood before a modest building with a freshly painted sign, the Ripple Center for Compassionate Action. What had begun as a small nonprofit operating out of Grace's garage had grown into an international organization with a simple mission: to teach people how to recognize and respond to suffering in others, creating chains of kindness that spread outward in ever-widening circles. "Nervous?" asked Lily, now Dr. Parker, who had taken a sabbatical from her medical residency to help launch the center's newest initiative, a program training healthcare workers to identify patients in emotional crisis. Emma smiled. "A little. It's a big day." Inside, the center hummed with activity. Michael, who had channeled his experience with childhood cancer into becoming a child life specialist, was setting up chairs in the main hall. David, retired early from his accounting career to serve as the organization's financial director, checked sound equipment. Sarah moved through the space arranging flowers. Blue hydrangeas, Emma's favorite. At precisely 10 a.m., the doors opened to welcome the center's first official class of Ripple Makers. 50 individuals selected from thousands of applicants, worldwide. They came from different backgrounds, faiths, and professions, but shared one common trait. Each had experienced what Emma called a thin place moment, a time when the boundary between ordinary reality and something greater had momentarily dissolved. Among them was a firefighter who had been trapped in a burning building, a hospice nurse who regularly witnessed her dying patients conversing with unseen presences, a physicist whose near-fatal mountain climbing accident had left him with questions his equations couldn't answer, and a young artist whose childhood imaginary friend had predicted future events with unsettling accuracy. As Emma took her place at the podium, she felt a familiar presence beside her, not visible, but as real as the wooden floor beneath her feet. She had long ago stopped trying to convince skeptics of what she knew to be true. Some experiences couldn't be proven, only lived. "Welcome," she began, her voice clear and confident. "Each of you is here because you've glimpsed something beyond the ordinary, something that changed you. Today we begin learning how to use that change to help others." From the back of the room, Grace watched with quiet satisfaction. Now in her 60s, her hair had silvered, but her eyes remained sharp and kind. Beside her stood Dr. Patel, who had eventually joined the center's medical advisory board after witnessing too many unexplainable recoveries in his practice to dismiss them as mere coincidence. "I still don't have the language for what happens in these thin places," Emma continued. "Science calls them hallucinations, or neurological anomalies. Religion names them miracles, or divine interventions. Philosophy terms them transcendent experiences. But the label matters less than what we do with them." She paused, looking out at the faces before her, each carrying their own story, their own wound, their own glimpse of something larger. "What I've learned in the years since my own experience is this: the veil between worlds isn't as solid as we think. And when we're granted a glimpse beyond it, whether through trauma, love, art, or grace, we're being trusted with something precious. Not just knowledge, but responsibility. In the audience, a young woman wiped away tears. Emma recognized her immediately, Zoe Williams, whose viral video about comforting a stranger on a bridge had saved a life and launched a national conversation about mental health. What the video hadn't captured was Zoe's explanation for being on that bridge at that exact moment. A dream so vivid it had woken her from sleep, compelling her to drive there at 3 a.m. The responsibility isn't to convince others of what you've seen, Emma continued. It's to live differently because of it. To recognize that we exist in a web of connection that extends beyond what our ordinary senses perceive. To understand that kindness isn't just nice, it's necessary. It's the language of that other realm translated into human action. As she spoke, Emma felt the familiar warmth spreading through her chest, the sensation that had accompanied every major decision since that day at the pool. Not a voice, exactly, but a certainty. A knowing. After the formal presentation, as attendees broke into small discussion groups, Emma slipped outside for a moment of quiet. The center's garden was just beginning to show signs of autumn, maple leaves turning crimson at their edges, black-eyed Susans giving their final golden display before frost. She sat on a stone bench, breathing in the sharp, clean scent of approaching winter when she sensed someone approaching. "May I join you?" asked a voice she didn't recognize. Emma looked up to see a woman about her own age, with dark hair and eyes that seemed somehow familiar. "Of course," Emma replied, moving over to make room. The woman sat, her hands folded carefully in her lap. "My name is Miriam," she said after a moment. "I wasn't sure about coming today. I'm not like the others in there. I haven't had a near-death experience or a vision or anything like that." Emma waited, sensing there was more. "I'm here because of my mother," Miriam continued. "She was a nurse. She died last year, but before she did, she made me promise to find you and give you something." From her purse, Miriam withdrew a small, worn notebook. "She said you'd understand what it means." Emma accepted the notebook, her fingers tracing the faded cover. When she opened it, her breath caught. On the first page, in careful handwriting, was a date, July 15th, the day Emma had drowned. And beneath it, a detailed description of a child with copper hair and a constellation of freckles, pulled lifeless from a community pool. "Your mother," Emma said softly, realization dawning. "She was there that day." Miriam nodded. "She was a nursing student then, at the pool with her younger brother. She helped with CPR until the paramedics arrived. She said something happened that day that she could never explain. A light she saw around you when you started breathing again." Emma turned the pages slowly. The notebook contained years of observations, dates, names, brief descriptions of patients or strangers the nurse had felt inexplicably drawn to help. In the margins were small sketches of wings. "She never told anyone else about what she saw," Miriam said. She was afraid they'd think she was crazy, but she kept track of every time she felt guided, I guess. Every person she felt compelled to help. She called them her angel assignments. Emma closed the notebook gently, holding it against her heart. And did she ever see where those ripples led? The people she helped? Miriam smiled for the first time. "That's the other reason I'm here. One of the names in that book is Joseph Williams, my father." She felt drawn to the emergency room the night he was brought in after a car accident, even though she wasn't scheduled to work. The doctors had given up, but she insisted they try one more time. She paused. "I exist because of whatever she experienced that day at the pool with you." As the implications of this connection settled between them, Emma felt the pieces clicking into place, another strand in the vast, invisible web she had glimpsed all those years ago. "Would you like to see something?" Emma asked, standing and offering her hand to Miriam. She led the way to a small room off the main hall of the center, Unlike the modern, minimalist design of the rest of the building, this space was warm and intimate, its walls covered with photographs, hundreds of them, arranged in concentric circles around a central image of a young girl with copper hair and freckles lying on a hospital bed. Every person in these photographs has a story that connects, directly or indirectly, to what happened to me that day, Emma explained. Michael, who's now helping children cope with their own illnesses. Lily, who's developing new protocols for pediatric emergency care. Grace, who recognized something in me because of her own experience. She touched a photograph of an elderly woman with kind eyes. Mrs. Abernathy, who used the time I gave her to reconcile with her estranged daughter before she died. Her finger moved to another image, a middle-aged man with a bus driver's uniform. Mr. Jenkins, who started a support group for grieving. Parents after I helped him through his mother's death. Miriam moved slowly around the room, taking in the faces, old and young, from every background imaginable. It's like a map, she said quietly. Emma nodded. A map of ripples. And now we know your mother was one of the first. She took Miriam's hand. Which means you're part of this story too. Later that evening, after the attendees had departed and the staff had gone home, Emma remained in the center's garden. The first stars were appearing in the darkening sky, pinpricks of light in the vast expanse. David found her there, a shawl draped over his arm. Thought you might need this, he said, wrapping it around her shoulders. It's getting cold. Thanks, Dad. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching night settle over the garden. I've been thinking about what you asked me to promise, David said finally, that night before your surgery. About keeping the ripples going if you didn't make. Emma leaned her head against his shoulder, the way she had as a child. And you did. Even though I survived, I didn't believe at first, he admitted. About the angel, the visions. I thought it was trauma, then the tumor. I needed explanations that fit my understanding of the world. And now? David gestured toward the center, its windows glowing with warm light. Now I've seen too much to doubt. Too many connections that can't be coincidence. Too many lives changed, including my own. He paused. I still don't know what to call it. Angel, higher consciousness, quantum entanglement. The name doesn't matter so much anymore. Emma smiled. That's what the angel told me, you know. That names are just human attempts to categorize what can't be contained. What matters is recognizing the connection. As they sat together in the gathering darkness, Emma felt that familiar warmth again. Not a visitation this time, but a reminder. A gentle confirmation that the work was unfolding as it should, that the ripples would continue long after her own story ended. Because that was the final truth the angel had shown her, in those 4 minutes and 37 seconds when she had slipped beyond the veil. That love was not just an emotion, but a force, moving through the universe like light through water, bending around obstacles, finding its way into the darkest places. And that each act of kindness, no matter how small, sent that love rippling outward in ways no one could fully trace or measure. Emma had once asked the angel why she had been chosen. Why her, out of all the children in the world? Everyone is chosen, the angel had replied. But not everyone remembers when they return, now. Sitting in the garden of the center that bore witness to that memory, Emma whispered a quiet thank you to the presence that had never truly left her. For the gift not of more life, but of a life with meaning. For the chance to create ripples that would long outlast her, connecting strangers across time and space in an ever-expanding circle of compassion. And somewhere, just beyond the reach of ordinary sight, the angel smiled.